Hi everyone, welcome to our October Backyard Update,
I'm John,
and I'm Caryn.
as most of you know. Hey, what we want to do this time is something a little bit more in depth. We're often asked, what do we do to help people who are deconstructing? We've talked a lot about the cohorts and the environment we provide in the cohorts that, create a safe environment for people to ask their questions and express their doubts, and we found the environment to be very helpful. But we very rarely have discussed what's the curriculum, what do we teach, and we've been asked a lot about that. How do you help people to find Jesus again through what are you teaching in your cohort? So we want to kind of give an example of that this week. One of the main reasons that people deconstruct, and studies have shown, and we've talked about it before, is the denial of science, right? And we've talked about that before with science of biology and origins. But one way that we see a lot is the denial of mental health science, right? Because mental health science is science.
It is.
And people who have been maybe shamed for seeing a quote unquote secular psychologist, or people who have not been affirmed for seeking mental health, or even having their mental health issues invalidated and denied, right? One recent prominent Christian leader said there's no such thing as ADHD and there's no such thing as PTSD. So what we'd like to do is show you how we address that specific issue, and show you how our course corrections help people with that. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to ask Caryn to tell her story, because this is something that your story intersects with.
Yeah, very near and dear to my heart.
So what we'd like to know, first I'm going to ask you to take your therapist hat off.
Okay.
Okay, I know that's really hard for you to do. But take your therapist hat off and just put yourself back in the shoes of being a young believer. And talk to us about how the denial of mental health science intersected with your story, with your deconstruction, with the hurt that you've experienced.
Yeah, I think, just if I'm going to bottom line it, I was afraid, really afraid of what secular science or psychology would do to me, and I was afraid of being led astray. So I think...
Can I ask you where that fear came from?
Yeah. So the fear came from actually leadership, things that were directly said and things that were implied. Maybe culture has a lot to do with it, the Christian cultures you're raised in. One, negative feelings are bad. So
Negative feelings such as?
Anger, frustration, lack of peace. They're bad, and so they should be confessed.
Okay.
Right? So, which, as someone who has committed their life to Christ, wanted to go and do everything that God has called me to do, I was very vigilant with that kind of behavior, actually. And so, so the messaging that I often received, directly and indirectly, was don't trust secular science, don't trust a therapy. Psychology is bad, and the only thing that's really helpful, that you could really trust, is biblical counseling. And it's not to demean anybody who's a biblical counselor. There are some really great, beautiful ones, but that just wasn't my experience.
So you said you felt fear.
Yeah.
And so what was the result of that? How did that affect your walk with God? How did that affect your mental health?
I didn't get any. I mean, what I did was the things that a good Christian would do. I memorized scripture. I was in a discipleship program. I confessed my sin. I would seek forgiveness if, let's say, if I got angry. But I was still struggling with, well, I didn't have even a name for it. I really, and you know this, obviously he knows my story, but I'm telling you guys, is I struggle with feeling so isolated, and I didn't have a name for it. I just knew I would feel discouraged or not close to you at times, even though I knew you were my best friend. Like, there wasn't anything really bad happening. So those are some of the things, and I didn't know what to do with what I was struggling with, since I was doing all the right things, so to speak.
Right.
If that makes sense.
I think so. Let me repeat what I hear you saying. And so what I hear is you were struggling with different mental health issues. You sought help out, and the help you got was memorizing scripture, confessing sin, and those kind of things.
Yeah.
And you did those things,
Yeah.
but you didn't feel well. What?
Yeah. Well, in my mind, what I said was, "Ugh, these things are not working," and that scared me, because I knew that who God is, that He's good and He's trustworthy. But if things weren't working and God hasn't changed, then there's something else. There's something more going on with me. And actually, for a while, it was actually harmful, because it really increased shame. Again, these are all words I have now that I didn't have back then.
Well, I mean, I remember back then, and you would say stuff like, "Well, there must be something wrong with me."
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm doing these things, I'm not getting better, so there must be something wrong with me, right?
Yeah. But I will say, functionally, if you were to watch me and observe me in ministry and relating with people, you wouldn't know that, as you'd have, as if I let you into my inner world, which very few people had access to.
And this is something we see in a lot of our cohort members, right?
Oh gosh, yeah.
A lot of our cohort members struggle with mental health issues, and they were invalidated by their churches. They've come and they felt like their churches didn't support them in their mental health. And so what we do in No Harbor is we have 6 course corrections. And these 6 course corrections are theological course corrections. It targets a dysfunctional aspect of evangelical theology, and it makes the necessary course corrections. And along those course corrections, many people find Jesus again, right? Mm-hmm. They're able to reframe their faith and find Jesus. So the course corrections that we are relevant, and we're not going to go through all the course corrections, but there's 2 course corrections that are most relevant to this. And it's the course correction 1, which we call the goodness of creation. And this is deconstructing the Platonic dualism that has entered Christian theology. And what I mean by Platonic dualism, Plato was a philosopher, and that theology, that philosophy got into Christian theology, where the philosophy was the immaterial was good, the immaterial is real, eternal, and the material, or the physical world, was corrupt. Mm-hmm. And so the goal was to get out of the physical and into the immaterial. And that came into Christianity, where now we have a Platonic dualism, where we separate secular and sacred, right? We see things of the flesh, of the material, as corrupt and temporary, right? And we see the immaterial, the spiritual, as good. And this infects everything, even like our view of the gospel, right? Our view of the gospel only has nothing to do with material world, right? And so but what it causes us to do is distrust anything secular, because it's worldly, or it's of the flesh, right? And so the course correction we make is the goodness of all creation, how God created all things, and all things are very good, right? And God created the immaterial and the material. As Paul says, the things seen and things unseen. And we put back together the immaterial and material, and we erase the distinction between secular and sacred, and all things are very good, all things are given to us by God. And so that includes science, and includes our physical bodies, right? And then we apply that to the human body in our second course correction, which is becoming fully human. And in becoming fully human, among other things, is seeing us as God's image bearers. We see ourselves not just as earth suits. In fact, we reject the term earth suit, that I'm somehow, my body is just a vehicle to carry my soul around, right? But we are a body, and our bodies and our soul are one, and our emotional health and our physical health and our spiritual health, it's all one thing, right? And so we make these course corrections, and where we see the person as whole, we erase the distinction between secular and sacred, and we begin to understand that we can learn a lot from the study of human biology and study of human psychology, and we can integrate what we know from science with what we know from scriptures and the wisdom we have from scripture. And so and there's so much more.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much more. We do this in 16 weeks in our cohort, so I'm trying to do it in 5 minutes, right? But but let's hear it in your story. So you didn't obviously, when you 15 years ago, read the book and make the course corrections, but these principles, these course corrections came into your life 15 years ago or so, and began to create transformation in your life.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to know now is, as a person who was invalidated in your mental health, was feeling afraid to go to a secular psychologist, and feeling bad about your spirit, your walk with God or yourself. How did the transformation come about? How did these principles contribute to your transformation?
Well, I will say the first thing, the only reason why I went to therapy is the recognition that something was happening with me, and because I was doing all my regular spiritual practices and they weren't working, right. And I knew a believer who was a solid believer. Like I knew she walked with God, and
but she was a licensed therapist.
But she was a licensed therapist, yeah, and I knew I could trust her. So right. I called her and I said, hey, I'm having some issues here, and I don't know who to get some help. And she referred me to somebody that she worked with.
Okay, so tell us what transpired in that therapy to help you to recover.
Okay, so I will tell you that there's some really significant instances that happened that I had totally cut out of my life. They were from two significant things. One, I had experienced some sexual abuse as a child. That, I had mentioned it. I told John when we got married, and to me, it was a done deal. It had no bearing on who I was.
I remember you told me, "Oh, I'm over it."
Yeah,
that's what you told me. Yeah,
doesn't affect me. And two, my dad passing away. He passed away when, we were newly married. So those two factors are what came up pretty quick in therapy, and it was shocking. I mean, I just remember that I was doing some journaling, right? So, which was not an uncommon practice for me as a believer, but journaling about my thoughts and feelings about some of the hurt that I was experiencing or feeling for people that we were working with. So we were carrying a lot of burdens at the time for other people that we were ministering to, and how it was all connected, and it connected to my hurt from childhood. Yeah. And that is nothing that you can usually get in biblical counseling.
Well, you said shocking, right?
Yeah.
So you were shocked by how you said you were shocked by how your father's death and how your past abuse has affected you. So there was a time where you felt like those things weren't affecting you, and you were surprised to find out that they were affecting you.
Yeah.
And so what was the process of healing from there?
So the process was, it's really hard to describe because there's so much therapeutic things that happen in the therapy room.
Well, one thing I remember you saying is that she asked you about the sensations you were having in your body.
Yeah, which I remember going, that's weird. And so, but, I was willing to try it. And so I just kind of quieted my body. And as I was telling a story, a memory that I had was somewhat painful. And there was a lot of things like that in therapy where I would describe something. And I can tell all of you guys this, but one of the things that regarding a lot of the pain that we were carrying for believers that we were walking alongside and family, I felt when I connected with my body that there was like a huge knot right here that I wasn't even really aware of till I was asked to look inward. And my therapist told me, I really think that over time, as we recount some of these stories, that knot is gonna go away. And I was like, all right, we'll see, because I was somewhat skeptical. But I'll be darned if she wasn't right. The issues that I was struggling with, just some of the pain that was really causing some anxiety, but also anger, that I had. As I recounted some of those memories and grieved things that were worthy of grieving, that were kind of locked away, that dissipated. And now, this is the beautiful thing about how we can integrate our faith and mental health. Now, when I feel some of that tension right here, which happens on occasion, like I remember a time last year when I was at a retreat, and I had been noticing it. I was just kind of rubbing here. I'm like, I'm just checking in. So now what I do is I check in with myself and I check in with the Lord. Is there anything there that he wants to reveal to me as I'm noticing this? And it's been a really beautiful integration of learning to listen to my body, and then listening to the Lord and see what he might want to show me in that space.
Yeah, and listening to your body, that's assuming that the physical matters, right?
Oh yeah. Well, before, what I would do, I would just push through. I mean, I'd push it to the side, got my scripture, fix my eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of my faith, all the things, and push that to the side, because to me it was negative and bad.
Right. And so let's now go to the present in our cohorts. We have several cohort members who have told us they left their church because they had mental health issues, and they were flat out either told that those things didn't exist. They just need to pray more or study more or whatever, or or they have gone to a licensed therapist and been shamed for going to a secular psychologist, and it's caused them so much struggle that they've left the church, but they don't want to leave Jesus, but they just can't exist in the church anymore. So
they don't really feel like they have a place to go.
Right. They have no harbor.
Yeah.
Right. And so now let's put your therapist hat back on. As a therapist who has been well trained and studied neuroscience and everything, what are we doing for our cohort members?
Oh, well, I think the biggest thing is being able to sit with somebody who is hurting. So often we feel, as the listener, uncomfortable with somebody else's struggle. And part of it is good motives. We want to see, you care about somebody, you want to see them thrive. But sometimes that wanting to help them is not helpful. What they really need is to know that they're cared for, and that is a huge thing that we create in No Harbor, a space to just first be and recount some of their hurts, just like I had to be willing to connect with those when I was early on in my healing journey.
I think for me, as a pastor who has done pastoral counseling back in those days, it was I was uncomfortable, but it was even more than that. I felt like I had to fix them because their thinking is wrong. And
it's our responsibility
to
fix
I have
them.
to correct them with biblical truth.
Yeah.
Right. And so if it's not really ADHD, they're just anxious. So be anxious for nothing. Right. And we just slap a Bible verse on their struggle. And I felt like it was my responsibility to correct them.
Yeah.
Right. But now, of course, corrections have helped me, because I realized that, what they're feeling and struggling with is part of being human, and the solutions, I don't want to call solutions, the interventions, are integrated. It's there's spiritual aspects of being with God's people and prayer and scripture, but then there's also a sound, therapeutic practices and integration with body and soul, and all those things come together to help create whole, healthy people.
Whole, healthy people.
The result is, it's funny because people come to us and they're beat up and they're hurt and they're really kind of very skittish maybe about faith. But when they understand that they can affirm the goodness of their whole selves and their bodies and integrate that, then they become more apt to consider Jesus again, right? Because now they realize that they don't have to deny their experiences or their hurts in order to be a Christian, right? They don't have to, like you were saying that you were, afraid and you don't have to be those things anymore to follow Jesus. You can be who you are and have anxieties and have depressions and other issues and still follow Jesus.
Oh, 100%.
Right.
I mean, I would say it's those parts of us that are weak and needy that help us to turn to Jesus once we know that he loves us. And we might know that intellectually, but we don't always know it internally. And I think that's a big part of what therapy enabled me to do as well.
And the cohorts too, because the cohorts are tangible expression of love.
Yeah.
Because when people, and it's amazing because these people a lot of times they don't even know each other when they get to the cohort. By 5 or 6 meetings, they're loving each other and affirming each other, and they're experiencing God's love through each other. And it's really amazing to see, and so much healing comes from that. Yeah. So we want to just kind of give you an idea of the nuts and bolts of what we do as far as helping people. All of this is in the book. Yeah. If you want to read the book, there's course corrections are there. Also, if you are in that boat where you're struggling with hurt from evangelicalism or the church, and you don't want to lose your relationship with Jesus and you're longing for spiritual community, please consider applying to join us in one of our cohorts, and that's at noharbor.org/cohorts.
Yeah. And I would like, there's one thing I want to add to that. And, we could talk about these things, for hours, obviously, because we're very passionate about it. But what really we wish is to be able to have conversations around a table, on Zoom, things like that, to just be able to get to know one another, to hear each other's stories. It's very much, we have our cohorts, which are so beautiful, and we go through the course correction. That's the skeleton of that, but it's in the exchange of knowing one another and caring for one another. That really is such a beautiful thing, and is I think redemptive. And part of the reason why I say that is, this is the best we can do right now in terms of sharing with you guys, our ministry partners as well. Yeah, well, that's it. I wish we could have more of these conversations. That's really what I want to say. Yeah, with each of you, because you're dear to us. Yes. And so appreciative of the partnership that we have with you.
Yeah, and people are finding wholeness and healing as a result of your partnership. So we're so thankful. Anyway, if you have any questions, please put them in the comments or shoot us an email. We're so grateful for your partnership. Thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Thanks.